Okay, good evening, everybody, to this evening's webinar. You've been invited via Talent Spa to participate in this session, which is all about how to write high-impact CV and indeed LinkedIn profile, specifically for the contract or interim market. I'll touch on a couple of things this evening regarding that marketplace specifically. So if there are any permies on this evening's webinar, people who aren't out-and-out contractors in some way or other, there'll still be some relevant content, and you're more than welcome to come on the journey, so to speak. But it is designed specifically for people in the contract space. And this evening, what we're going to talk about is a couple of formats that work really well within that environment, and take a look at the options you might have, some of the challenges that contractors tend to face in the recruitment market and how to overcome them, and how to pull together effective content for your CV and LinkedIn profile, which invariably does make a big difference to how then the CV gets treated, and consequently the bottom line and the most important thing is the results it generates for people like you in terms of getting interest and ultimately interviews and meetings with people you're targeting. So there's quite a lot of ground to cover. It's a bit hard to estimate how long it will go on because sometimes get overexcited and we drag on a little bit, but it'll be good content. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. And if you've got any questions, because this is audio one-way only broadcast, so I can't see you through a webcam, you can't see me, you can't, and I can't hear you. So it's one-way audio, but to deal with any questions you might have, you should have a question facility in the toolbar. You're normally to the right of your screen, but wherever, go to webinar, stop the toolbar. Just ask a question, and at the end of the session I'll go through as many as I can. Normally I can cover everybody's questions in a reasonable amount of time, and so I'll endeavour to do exactly that. And if I think it's too detailed or requires a one-to-one, then I can give you my details and we can pick it up at a later stage. But most questions I tend to be able to answer. And if you've not asked any questions but you'd like to listen to the answers, you're more than welcome to hang on at the end of the session. I'll let you know when we're shutting down the main presentation. I'll deal with the questions and then we'll exit the whole thing. So I'll let you know where we're at in the proceedings, and then you can act accordingly. And if you need to get off, you can get off. Just a brief way of introduction, all the sign-in and mechanisms for GoToWebinar is allocated to a colleague of mine, Matt Craven. So if you see any references to Matt or Matt Craven, he's the guy that runs the business here at CV and Interview Advisors. I'm one of his team, run a lot of the webinars. My name's Alistair. So you're dealing with Alistair this evening, but you'll see a lot of references to Matt on the GoToWebinar question and chat facility. In terms of some of the things that you need to know about, I guess a brief, and it will be brief, explanation of who on earth we are. So you've been invited via Talent Spa. We're one of their partners in regard to CV writing and what we call career enhancement products, things like interview coaching and bits and pieces like that. So that's what we do as a business. If there's one lesson you should take away from this evening, and it will be repeated more than once, it's that we view, of course everybody calls it a CV, but we refer to our CVs typically as business cases, and there are business cases to why somebody should hire you. We apply that kind of thinking to everybody's CV that we write, but it particularly applies to contractors and people in the interim space, because you are in many cases true legitimate mini businesses, trading and plying your wares. So that's one message that I think is really important, and it's how you should position the whole document that you go to market with. Purely giving people a list of things that you've done, qualifications that you've had, experiences that you've participated within is not enough these days. You've got to position your whole offering as a business case to somebody, and ultimately the justifications to why they should be interested in you. As far as the team here is concerned, within our business, well, we're a mix of people, senior execs, recruitment experts, even published authors, which is actually quite an important trait, as will become clear later. And although it's a horrible cliche, and I'm going to use it again more than once, hence the bold, hot skills, knowledge of those in your particular market at a particularly given time is really important, again, particularly in the current climate. So we're building a business case for people, and we're going to be talking about how you do that this evening if you want to do it yourself. But the other prerequisite is that you do understand what is currently hot within your industry or sector. If you know that, it helps an awful lot in constructing a strong business case. If you don't, it's worth sorting out and identifying what those hot skills are. And as I've made a point, I guess, we're working with Talent Spa. We also work with a lot of other organisations who provide advice and guidance either directly to people or through third parties like Talent Spa. And finally, in terms of my own involvement, I've got a background that's corporate recruiting, CV reviewing and CV writing. So whilst I wouldn't want to profess total expertise, I really just want to make sure that you understand that you're dealing with somebody who's seen the CV from a number of different angles. The recruiting bit is particularly important because the feedback we tend to get from a lot of people, both permanent and contract folk, is that I think there's a general misunderstanding in some cases, or lack of understanding about what happens to CVs these days, how they're treated, what kind of process they tend to go through, and we'll touch on some of those issues, or at least the most important issues later this evening, because understanding that helps again construct the kind of document you need to get to market with. So that's very briefly about us, hopefully just to set the scene on credibility if nothing else, but to introduce two themes: building a business case and understanding hot skills in your marketplace. Now, one of the questions we often get asked by contractors who approach us either through these webinars or directly through our website or other things that we get up to is that they have issues. Some of those issues we can't help them with, I'm afraid. Some of them, as regards their CV or business case, we can definitely help them with. And some of these may be familiar to you, and you may have difficulty, you may have some other issues or challenges that you need dealing with, and if I can help this evening, tap them in the question box. I'll do my best to do exactly that. So one of the issues that contractors typically face is that because they've done quite a lot, and if you're a career, and contractors tend to be, not exclusively, but tend to be quite well experienced and have got decent career experience under their belt in terms of number of years. If they listed everything they did, they find the document just goes on and on and on. And there's a bit of an urban myth in terms of how long a CV should be. Unless you're specifically asked by a recruiter or an employer, there is no real proof that it must be X number of pages. Some people have got it into their heads that it should be 2 pages. There's no real evidence to prove that that's true. Most of the CVs we write for our clients are probably 3 pages. So there is a fine line. You can't go overboard. But what you tend to find if you actually talk to employers and recruiters, the real thing they hate is getting rubbish. However long it is, they just don't like getting rubbish sent to them. And unfortunately, most CVs they get, and it is most CVs we get to review, tend to be pretty poor. So it doesn't matter whether they're 1, 2, 10, or even the world record, as far as my experience goes, 33 pages, yeah, 33, unbelievably. Then if it's just rubbish, it's rubbish, full stop. And it winds people up. So I think the urban myth stemmed from this need to try and condense whatever's being sent to people to some kind of meaningful amount of data. So if it is rubbish, they can quickly make the assessment. But to be honest, if you're sending somebody something that's 5, 6, 7 pages long, they'll probably just assume it's rubbish anyway and throw it in the bin, metaphorically speaking. So we'll touch on the content, of course, later. But there are ways of getting around this. How do I list what I've done, but keep a rein on the length of the document? Another challenge that often is faced by people in the contract space is that they're judged on the last thing that you did. This affects permanent folk as well to some degree, but if you list everything in chronological order and if you feel the need to stick within that because that's the way you've done it or people have encouraged you to do it, you may be harshly judged if you've, particularly in recent months or years, some contractors have had to take jobs that are lower than the average job they've had over the sort of previous 5 to 10 years maybe, really just to keep the walls from the door and earning money, and then they get judged by that last role, and it's not really where they want to be. there are ways around that, which I'll come on to later. Similar issue, but that if you've got a variety of experiences and it takes you sort of round the houses a little bit in terms of what your core expertise is. So on paper it looks like you're a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, or you've been working at a junior level fairly recently. Again, there are ways around presenting the information that help take the sting out of situations you may have faced which you don't think are ideal, but you've had to take or accommodate. And then lastly, not last in the sense of all challenges, but the top four, if you like, that we get people coming to us to face and deal with. If you've got a number of skills, for example, if you're a project manager but you're also a business analyst, and maybe you dabble in a bit of testing if you're on the IT side, and you could actually justifiably stake claim to any three of those roles, how do you get the CV to reflect the role that you're particularly interested in at a particular moment in time? So, as I say, if there are any other big issues that people are facing and they'd like to try and tackle, I can try and give you some kind of insight if you want to whack in anything in the question box, and I'll return to it later. But those are typically some of the things that we get asked to deal with or challenged with, and I'll present some answers later in terms of how we deal with that kind of set of circumstances. Now, importantly, before we get too excited about getting the CV right, it's probably logical to assess whether your CV, as it currently stands, is doing its job or not. And what I tend to find most times we run these webinars, or if we're talking to people, some people are completely clueless. They have not a clue as to whether the document's doing its job or not. Others have all the stats but haven't chosen to do anything with them if the stats aren't encouraging. So it's probably worth just taking a brief look at what the acid test is for your CV's performance, and it is this, and pretty much only this. If there are, and this is based on the assumption that you are applying for jobs that justifiably and based on all the evidence at your disposal, you honestly think you could perform. So if you're a IT project manager or a business analyst and you're trying to become a nuclear submarine captain, it's not going to happen whether you change your CV, we change your CV, or anybody else changes your CV. It's just not going to work, of course. So assuming that you are applying for relevant jobs based on the evidence that you're presented with, and let's say you apply for 10 of those jobs, if you're getting 8, 9, 10 interviews regularly, i.e. 80, 90, 100% hit rate, there's nothing wrong with your CV. It's being interpreted well. You're not going to do, nobody's going to be able to improve things much over those kind of ratios, and arguably you could say, oh, I'd love to be in that situation, but I'm just not. Well, fine. If you are, it's a great document, it's doing its job. However, if you're not getting any interviews at all, maybe 1, 2, 3 out of the 10, then pretty much, not exclusively, but pretty much the only reason that you're not getting further forward, particularly these days, for reasons I'll come on to later, is that somebody somewhere doesn't like what you're sending them. There's something on there that's jarring. Bottom line is most people aren't known by the person that they send the details to, so it's not a personal reflection on you as an individual. If that were the case, that's a wholly different issue, and the CV, again, is not going to do much to get around that problem. But in most cases, you're sending your document off to somebody, they're looking at it, and they're interpreting it, and believe you me, even though the perception is that there's lots of people out there and that's an employer's market, it's nowhere near that easy. Employers are finding it really difficult to find good people. So it's not for want of trying, and often they'll compromise all sorts of things if they feel that they've got the right kind of individual in front of them. But because they're getting so many applications to jobs, generally speaking, it's very easy in the initial filtering process to get rejected. And the mistakes most people make, we'll touch on some of those later in terms of what they are and how to address them. But it's nearly always down to some fundamental flaw in the document, and increasingly a fundamental flaw replicated on LinkedIn, which is letting people down. And so the interview to applications ratio is the key measure of how effective your CV is. And if you're unfortunate enough to have spent a lot of time applying for jobs and just not getting the traction and the interest, then really the simple answer is you've got to do something about it. What you've got to do is your choice. Some people choose not to do anything about it at all, however much people would shout and advise them otherwise, and ultimately that is a personal choice. Some people are getting really duff advice from recruiters, very rarely employers, I have to say. Employers will tell the recruiter what they think, but they will never get fed back to the individual, or very rarely. So you've got to be harsh about this. Don't listen to what people are telling you in terms of their feedback on your CV unless it's absolutely cast iron guaranteed and makes a huge amount of sense to you and can be backed up with stats, because the stats say everything. If you're not getting the interviews, it's because somebody out there doesn't like what you've sent them on the CV. If you're getting interviews but not progressing through the system to further interviews or meetings, that's something else besides. And that's obviously something fundamental to do with the interaction between you and the other person, or it's more to do with that. But initially, to get that interest, it's nearly always to do with the CV. In terms of what do you do, well, then you've got two real options, accepting that you do something, because the third option is you don't do anything at all. You either fix the problem yourself, steps to which you'll get this evening, or you seek professional help, and of course that involves people like us. So there are options. And for any people out there wondering, I mean, it's very hard to give a precise number because, of course, life isn't that simple. But we have seen everything from a modest double-digit percentage increase to a massive 100% plus increase in success rate of clients that have had their CVs sorted. And when I mean CV sorted, in the bulk of those stats, of course, it's us having an impact on their CV by writing it, but not exclusively so. There's some people in there who we've worked with or helped or guided or seen a webinar and gone off, done something about it, we've looked at their results and thought, yeah, that's actually pretty good, and they've gone out and proven the case. So it's possible, if you sort out your message and how you're promoting yourself to your target audience, building this business case, which I referred to earlier, you can make a fundamental difference to how people react to that. And there is a fine line between, we're not in the business of trying to make people look better than they are or putting rose-tinted glasses on the subject matter. That's not what it's about. People do that, and I'm sure if you've looked at some folks' LinkedIn profiles, they'll have invented everything that God has given us in some cases, and amazingly people seem to sometimes believe it. But all those things come out in the wash at some point in time. So we're all about building a realistic business case, positive, yes, but not taking you on an egotistical road trip and trying to make you something that you're not. And if you're doing something to your CV yourself, that's not what you have to do. And I'll show you about that. I'll show you some steps about that later this evening. So, two really big messages. Build a business case, yes, and assess how your document and marketability is performing at this moment in time. Both very easy to do, particularly the assessment of how your document is performing. Some of you will know how it's performing right now. Choices then a little bit more difficult is, what do you do? Well, do something would be our recommendation. Either do it yourself or get somebody to help you. So on to the bit about how do you contractors specifically deal with sorting their CV, and later I'll talk about LinkedIn, but a lot of what I talk about as far as the CV can be ported across to LinkedIn in terms of the structure and the content. The actual way it's done actually varies quite a lot, but that's for a separate conversation potentially. But there are two things that we can offer people or would advise people to take as far as the format of their CV is concerned. And I'm going to take a look at one of those formats in a lot of detail this evening, but I want to also mention an option, because it depends how much experience you have, the market that you're in, again, more of which later. But one option, which most people tend to take without any guidance, is a chronological style of CV. So however they open up with some kind of statement, they then progressively and normally quite quickly get into this is what I am currently doing or have most recently done, and then they just go and are sort of wandering meander through their past in some style or fashion. So we offer that kind of style, but with a tweak. It's a fairly substantial tweak, more of which later. the format that I'm going to spend more of this evening talking about is unique to contractors or people in the interim market, and it's heavily biased towards providing your target audience with proof via case studies, a portfolio of case studies, as to your competencies, abilities, experience, and ability to deliver. The reason why we offer two formats is because there are specific circumstances where one works better than the other. Having said that, it's not that one would never work in another environment. It's just that we offer the choice to people, either for them to go off and do it themselves, or if we were writing their CV for them, we give people the choice, because sometimes one format does work spectacularly better than another. Most of the time, the individual knows which would suit them best, because they understand the market they're in and their abilities. But if you ever needed any guidance on this or help, that's something we can talk about separately. Briefly, the chronological style with a tweak, or what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, what this suits best is the kind of people who are relatively new to the contract market. So if you've been in permanent work for, let's say, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, even 20 years, and then suddenly emerged into the contract market and decide to go off down that route and become a freelancer or whatever, then the kind of more traditional, for want of a better word, chronological style CV would tend to work best. It also works best for people who are working with recruiters who predominantly don't really understand the contract market. Now, the other evening I had a very good question asked, which is, how do you know whether the recruiter understands the contract market or not? Well, if they refer to you as being a glorified temp, although they might not insert the word glorified, so if they think of you as a temp, talk to you in that kind of phraseology, or you can just tell the fact that they're puzzled that you work under a limited business, or you mention an umbrella company, and you know, they think the worst kind of thing, they think about rainfall and precipitation rather than anything else, then those are indicators. And normally, again, most individuals tend to know whether they're dealing with professional recruiters who understand the market or not. If the bulk of the work you get, the bulk of the contact you have with recruiters is through those kind of folk, you probably want to stick with the more traditional style. And also, if you're dealing with clients, or indeed recruiters, but particularly clients who deal with massively high volumes of recruitment and selection, and therefore have automated processes and very inexperienced people, inexperienced in the sense they don't really understand the functions or the expertise you have, you're just a piece of paper, a name, a number whizzing through the system. Again, our advice would tend to walk towards a more traditional style CV. The tweak is that most people, when they write such a CV, as I indicated earlier, is that they start off with things, the obvious stuff: name, address, sometimes education, professional qualifications, technical skills, and then get straight into the, right, this is who I'm working for right now, this is the job I've done most recently, or I'm performing right now, and I've been here for X number of months, and these are the few of the things that I've been up to. And you might think, well, then that's fine, and for some people it might be fine. It all depends on the market you're in, but generally speaking, it's not a great way to start the CV. And so our tweak, again, remembering that we're trying to build a business case, is that before we start talking about where you've worked and some of the things that actually aren't that important for you to get an interview, like education, so very rarely is education the driving force unless you're a recent graduate. And even then, to be honest, there's so many graduates, that's not the driving force. The driving force is more proof of competencies and any experience that you might have had. And certainly as you mature and get more experience, then the things you're going to be hired for are all about your experience and ability to deliver. So that ought to be the message on page 1 of your CV. It's, here is my business case presenting to you, Mr. or Mrs. Target Audience, my abilities to deliver. And our career highlights section, again, I'll show you this later, is a way of getting around some of the problems we talked about quite early on, which is the, yeah, but my last job isn't really what I want to do. Or don't present them with your last job as the most obvious thing on the CV then. Or, yeah, what I really want to get across is my expertise in these fields. But unfortunately that was 5 or 6 years ago, so by the time they read that, they may never get there. They may never get to that part of the CV that I really want them to read. So our argument again is, okay, fine, we'll bring that to the front. And then people say, yeah, but it was 5 years ago. And so there are all sorts of ways of repackaging and representing information which most people don't see because they feel constrained to a particular style of CV. So our tweak is first build a business case, and always remember that's the driving force, and B, use technology, a tweak that I'll come on to later, and a methodology that I'll come on to later, which is to build career highlights and use that as the driver rather than jumping straight into what you currently or have most recently done. And the first page of either side of CV ought to be a very strong replication of, in effect, what the target audience is actually looking for. And I talk about target audience a lot. It's the best way to describe whoever you are pitching at. So it could be recruitment people, because that's the only way you can get to your marketplace. It could be employers directly. Doesn't really matter, but you do need to understand who those people are, the motivations are, what they're looking for, and the first page of any CV needs to be the best page, the bit that's going to convince somebody to actually do something, again, for reasons we'll come on to later. So I'm going to park the chronological style for a while. If anybody's got any questions about that later, more than happy to deal with it. And at a separate point in time, if anybody ever wants to contact us and quiz us about that, again, absolutely fine. And if anybody ever decides to use our services and wonders which style to go for, because that's one of the choices you probably want to make, again, that we can have a bit more of a discussion and work out the specifics for each individual. But it's important to realise there are different options depending on some of those factors we've just talked about, and they're available to. So some people ask us for both styles because they're dealing in both kinds of markets, and that's absolutely fine. And you can go to market with both styles. Okay, more of this evening I want to spend on this case study or portfolio style, which, as I hinted at earlier, is all about providing proof and evidence to your target audience of the capabilities that you have, which is really what they're going to be making decisions on you about, almost more than anything else, of course. And one of the beauties of this style, and I'll show you a real-life example shortly, is that by escaping from the chronological order of things and that sort of structure that it automatically places on people, you can reorder, or it gives you the facility to reorder your contracts in any order you like. So if you're wearing 3 hats because you are a project manager, a business analyst and a tester, then you choose which hat you want to wear more than any else, or how big the number 1 hat's going to be, and you place that evidence higher up the CV than you might otherwise have previously done. So there are some advantages already leaking through, so it allows you to deal with that particular issue. By ensuring that each of the case studies that you feature, and typically on a CV we'd probably be looking for 8 separate events, projects, assignments to write up that demonstrate your ability. 8 is a magic number because it predefines the size of the CV. It's enough information to give people variety and choice, the reader in other words, but not so much that it bores them rigid or compromises your ability to secure an interview. So it is really important that each of those cases, each 8, is given equal space, time and attention. Far too many people tend to focus on 2 or 3 things that are really important, and you can tell it because they write lots about them. And then anything else they mention almost looks weaker by the very fact that they've spent so little time explaining it. And that's a dead giveaway. People will see through that real quick. If you give half a page to something and then 2 lines to something else, it just automatically says that one was important and one wasn't, irrespective of the truth. So they need to be balanced and well written. I suppose it presupposes, of course, that these things need to be actual real-life events. They can't be hyperbole or inventions. They have to be the best things you can go to market with, and so that needs some thought. Actually, it's not as easy as most people think, and it's certainly not about writing about 8 or whatever the number is random events. They have to be well thought and with relevance to your target audience. Now I'll shortly show you an example of the CV, but I want to try and get across now the structure of the CV in terms of if you've decided to present to your target audience case study examples of what you're able to do, you need to build up some kind of structure, build this business case, this page one particularly of the CV, and how might that look if you're going to set up from writing. Well, a lot of people start their CV with a personal profile, a professional summary, a professional profile, an executive summary. It doesn't really matter what you call it. There's no real rights or wrongs within reason. Content is everything. And this ought to be a statement that provides people with a reasonable idea about what you are. Now, if you've got a statement, and again, you'll know about this from your own experiences and your own CVs, if you've got a CV that in effect just rambles on about either what you'd like to be doing, your objective, all the wonderful things that you are that actually can't be proven on a piece of paper, things like enthusiasm, dedication, passion, commitment, working as an individual or as part of a team, they're all lovely attributes, and employers probably would recruit for people with those kind of skills, but it's not going to make the blindest bit of difference as to whether you get an interview or not. Some people have a problem with that and think, well, of course it is, because people are searching for communication skills, and I've said on my CV I've got good interpersonal skills. Well, you can say anything you like in your CV, and most employers actually see through that. Worse still, most people take that approach on their CV. So if you've got any behavioural traits like that, so communication skills, interpersonal skills, ability to work in a team, work independently, enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, any of those adjectives, it's a waste of time. People will make their own minds up about those at a later stage. You're only going to get some brief insight into all of those things at interview, and even then you're probably not really going to understand whether the person's got what you would like to have in your team. Realistically, it's going to be a month, 2, 3 months maybe before they can retrospectively judge you and say, yes, the person has indeed got all the skills they claim to have. So there's no point in wasting space on your CV about that. It's not going to get you selected for interview. What is going to get you selected for interview is mirroring, in effect, what the employer is looking for in the marketplace. And the first thing that's important about that is what are you? Are you, in effect, what they're looking for? And the first part of that is the job title, or some generic term that reflects the job title. So if you're a project manager, state on the CV straight away, particularly if the jobs you're going for are project manager roles, that you are an experienced project manager. So it's not particularly complicated. I'm surprised how many people don't give a clue as to what they do early enough. So the danger is, in the 5 to 20 seconds your CV is likely to get attention in the first filtering process. If you haven't made it clear what you are pretty quickly, you could easily get rejected. And most people find that some people actually don't believe it, but if you've ever watched a recruiter filter through 100 or so applications for a job or an opportunity, a contract or a role or whatever, and sometimes it's well over 100, most people wrongly assume that A, they're amongst like-minded applicants. Not true. Most applicants, or I should say a good healthy percentage of the applicants, are in effect time wasting. They can't do the job, they haven't got the skills to do the job, but they've applied nonetheless. If you're a recruiter who spends all their days and nights and mornings or whatever looking through CVs that aren't right and demotivate you, it becomes very easy to become trigger happy and to reject people who don't appear to be right within the first few seconds of a CV glance. So don't imagine you're getting somebody sat down with a cup of coffee looking at your CV in depth. At that first phase, it's often very brief, very quick, very brutal, and they'll see probably the top half, if you're lucky, of page 1 of your CV. So page 1 currently doesn't say a great deal about what you are and what you've got to offer this world. Chances are your time in that process is going to be fairly short. So very simple, what you are. Horrible cliche again, I'm afraid, but you've got to convey, again, very quickly, what your overriding value proposition is. In effect, if somebody's going to sink 2, 3, 4, 500 quid a day into you, what is the return on that investment you're going to offer? You've got to hint at it. It's not a detailed assessment of what you're going to be offering them. It's a brief summary of the areas that you could really deliver in. Again, I'll show you an example very shortly. Linked to that are the handful of things that make you good at what you do. Again, the words hot skills comes into play here. Most employers have a sort of hit list of things that they really want to get from somebody joining the business in whatever capacity. So try and mirror those in your CV. This opening statement is a great place to, in effect, reflect to the recruiter or HR person, whoever's doing that initial filtering. You're almost wanting to say, if they've described metaphorically, we're looking for a square peg, your CV needs to be saying pretty quickly, I am a square peg. If you're portraying yourself as a round peg, hexagonal peg, or a triangular peg, automatically you're at disadvantage with all of the other people, if there are any, who have actually taken the time to say, I am the square peg you've been looking for. So a bit of a strange analogy, but that's how simple sometimes it is. Difficulty is understanding which of the skills to mention, maybe. As I've hinted at, avoid any behavioural personality claims or traits, so the enthusiasm, dedication, team working, presentation skills, all of that, wholly pointless. And particularly for contractors and interim folk, you need to be thinking about yourself as a product, a service. However unpleasant that might seem, I'm afraid that's the best way to imagine yourself. If you've bought a house, a car, a washing machine, any electrical good, chances are you will have reviewed, yes, features of the product, but actually you'll have either interpreted or had force-fed what benefits accrue from having those features. So if it's a washing machine, a higher spin speed, big deal. If that gets your clothes drier, that might mean something to you. You might select the product as a consequence. If the product uses, it's AAA rated, it's a great feature, the benefit is it saves you electricity, you might buy it for those reasons. Some features are almost implicit in terms of offering a benefit. That's great, so you don't have to explain it too much to people. But as a complex thing like a human being, where there's lots of competition out there, lots of people going to market with different messages, you really do need to think about, yes, I've got lots of features, lots of things I can offer, but what's the benefits? What is the employer going to get from you as a consequence of you bringing all these wonderful features to them? So thinking like that will help craft this opening statement, in effect the value you can add to the business. I promised an example at long last. Here is one. It looks a bit big on the screen. Trust me, on the CV it actually looks quite meaningful and tight, and normally means and comes across quite well. I'll let you read it for yourselves, but it addresses all the issues we just talked about. It's stating exactly what this person is. They're a finance director. You don't have to say exactly what your job title is per se. The finance director is fairly generic. You could put senior finance professional. There's all sorts of ways you can describe what people are. But if it's finance director, it's still well-used things, a bit like project manager, program manager, well-used terms. The job title might not be precisely that, but if that's the skill set that you have and the area that you occupy, what you're trying to do is just reflect in this opening statement what the target audience is likely to be expecting to see. So it's making that clear. The core value proposition is the protecting cash flow and profitability bit, and then there's a handful of things, a handful of things that this person's good at, all revolve around managing teams, doing bits and pieces around the finance space, blah, 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 blah. Now, anybody, anywhere, at any level, in any job can write something like this. And this is specific, of course, to a particular individual. It is a real-life example. But everybody can do something like this, whether you have experience or not. You just change the content. The important thing is understanding what that target audience is expecting to see. And if you know that, or take the time to uncover it, it makes life a whole lot easier. So that's an example. That's an opening statement. It would take up, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 lines tops on a typical CV. Enough to give people a real clear indication, but not enough to send them over the edge, so to speak. The next section on the CV would be what we call a key skills or areas of expertise section, and this is a great area, and that professional summary can be changed quite a lot actually to reflect different positions you might apply for. But this key skills area you can customize even more. And it really is just a list, bullet-pointed list, as they are appearing on the screen right now, of things that you have that are black and white issues that reflect often what a job description, profile, some kind of assignment document might have within it. Obviously, you can only put things that you can actually deliver on, but it could be a whole number of things. Typically, we'd say somewhere between 10 and 16 at a stretch, 10 to 14 ideally, different things, different bullets. So 5 to 7 on the left-hand side, 5 to 7 on the right-hand side of your CV. The trick is making sure that you pick the right 10 to 14. So a lot of people just randomly pick things. A lot of people get this wrong and put stuff again that's behavioural. So they put communication skills. And it's not that that's hideously wrong per se. The trouble is it doesn't differentiate. And how can you prove it on the CV? So pick things that are demonstrable, that are well searched for phrases. So again, there is an element of skill in its own right here, in the sense that you need to know what those hot skills in the marketplace are. So for a project manager, Prince 2 project management is a classic. And then some of those others you can see on the screen right now are equally generic. They're well searched for. People tend to enter this kind of stuff into database search engines, LinkedIn, to try and identify people that might have skills. But for your market, in your sectors, there'll be a handful that are very precisely relevant to your particular direction and career objective. So you'd have an area of the CV opening up professional summary. Then this would be underneath a table of bullets, just explaining briefly areas of competence that you possess. 2 real benefits of this, which I've sort of given clues to. Visually, it just looks nice, and it given the time that you're going to get and that first filtering stage, somebody's going to look at the CV, read some, if not all, of that opening statement. It'll make them feel at least comfortable that you're a valid applicant in the right space and justifiably should be treated seriously. Their eyes will then drift to these bullets, dead easy to read. They're 3 or 4 words tops, sometimes just 2 words long. So there's no big explanation. It's just to reflect skills that they're actually probably looking out for. And the more junior the person, the better this works to some degree, because they've been asked to look for certain attributes. And if you're reflecting those attributes on your CV to that individual, you'll get a big green tick rather than a horrible word cross, more often than not. The second major advantage, of course, is that as soon as your CV leaves your building, so to speak, and hits any database or electronic interface of any kind, it'll be indexed, and the various things will be done to it. And if you get this section right, it'll appear much higher up the batting order of people's internal databases, be they recruiters or employers, LinkedIn, any other electronic manifestation of your CV. Just work as a good store of keywords and phrases. So really important, but you can customize it, so it shouldn't stay the same on your CV all the time, unless the skills don't change a great deal in the space you're operating within. And then just before I show you an example of how this all stitches together on a real-life CV, remembering that we're not following the typical chronological order of things. So far we've got an opening statement, professional summary, we've got some bullet-pointed key skills. And we're going to have a little area which we tend to head current role. And this is a really good way of explaining, as a contractor, what you're up to. So for, let's say, just let's think of an example, because I can't remember the text that appears later, but let's say roughly from some point in 2006, say June 2006, you've been a contractor. You'd state that. You'd put that you're a freelance professional contractor, or if you wanted to be more precise, and you're only ever considered as a project manager or a finance director or an interim level or whatever it is that you do, you might state that. And then the legal entity you operate under, if it's a limited business, it's sometimes good to put that, because the recruiters who do understand your market will understand what that means, and the employers will also understand that that's how you operate, and that indeed if they wanted to check you out they could, and that comes with that all the assumptions about liability insurance, blah 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 blah, and just some level of protection. In other words, they're not just dealing with somebody who's walked off the street necessarily. So it just adds a little bit of legitimacy to the way you operate and makes it clear to whoever's reading the document that that's how you work. It's also an area where you can describe, because maybe in your career to date, contract career to date, you've worked for some very impressive organisations, or organisations that you know your target audience would find compelling and interesting. It's a good area just to mention some of these things, and again, not to have to wait until the natural order of things, or page 2 or 3 of your CV for that message to come across. So, for example, if you've got really good, strong finance sector skills and you've worked for HBOS, RBS, Halifax, whoever, then you'd mention those big names because they mean something. The importance of this section is that it's designed to position the reader for what comes next, which is basically going to be a whole heap of case studies to prove the stuff that we just said you're good at on the earlier part of the CV. There's a nice scene setter. And here's a real-life example. So I wasn't actually far off. I think I said June 2006. So July 2006 to date, independent contractor / project manager. So you could any variant of that. That's not really that important. It's just setting the scene. So you could say freelance contractor, project manager, freelance contractor, finance expert, whatever best describes what you're about. And then a bit of text that covers the points we've just talked about. So since 2006, I've operated as a professional contractor, completing assignments for high-profile companies such as, and that could be the Halifax, RBS, HBOS, whatever. And importantly, below, and we'll see on the CV in a minute how this all works, below is a list of example assignments, or projects, whatever you want to call them, completed over this period, and possibly, if it's relevant to you, as well as major projects from a permanent career. In no particular order and not all are listed. And that's really important because what is about to follow is a list of things that you have chosen to feature on your CV, your business case, to the target audience you're interested in, which has been, in an ideal world, picked almost for them or for their type of situation. What you're not going to market with is a predefined, structured, chronological order of everything that you've done, which you feel that you've then lost control of because it doesn't say the things you want to do. So hopefully you're beginning to get the picture now that if you've got a career that is built up of a variety of different things more recently in the contract space, some of them you really rate and are valuable and you really want to go to market with, and some of them you wish you'd maybe never done or you don't really want to focus or aren't what you're all about. This is the opportunity now to be able to junk those, or actually speaking, you don't have to mention them at all if you don't want to, and focus on what you think really sells your abilities. So this is why choosing the format of the CV is actually quite important, because for some people, their eyes light up and they literally think, yes, this is the future, this is the way forward, hallelujah, it gives me a different way of pitching my services. Other people try it, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and they realise they're dealing with recruiters who just don't get the contract market. But for some folk, this gives them a bit of an escape clause, which allows them to position what they want to show the marketplace and get back some control. So it all depends on your circumstances, but for most out-and-out contractors, it normally actually is a really good way of presenting what you're about. So, brief recap, you've opened up with what you're about, bullet pointed some key skills, you've said to the audience, this is what I'm currently up to and I've been doing it since such and such a day, and here's a little bit of background in terms of some of the folk I've worked with or sectors I might have experience of. And by the way, what you're about to read next is a relatively modest number of events, assignments, projects that I've been involved with, which really do demonstrate well my expertise, which I've just spent some time saying I have. The proof, if you like. So that's the structure of the CV. Now, before we go on to the actual building up this case study, I promised I'd show you an example, so let me do that. So gradually onto your screen will come a document, which is a real-life document for Matt himself. Just wait, I think you've all got it now. So, at the top, fairly unsurprisingly, name and contact details. Maybe some of you might wonder, where's the address? Well, most people tend to put their address at the top of the CV. Our argument is, and it's not just about contractors, but interestingly, we've had a lot of contractors say to us, or they found out that actually they were prejudged harshly on where they lived. So some contractors are prepared to work and live way off their patch, if you like, if the work's right. So if you open up your CV, and one of the key things for the recruiter or HR person is to look for folk who live in a particular postcode or are close to the head office, wherever that may be, or place of work. And the first thing they see is that Matt Craven lives in Cornwall, let's say Penzance, just to be overly dramatic, and the job is in John O'Groats, but Matt's actually, much later on his CV, put, or in a covering letter that's now been junked, by the way, I'm looking to relocate to John O'Groats, or actually he's quite comfortable with living there Monday to Friday and coming back at the weekends. There's a horrible risk that by almost leading with the most irrelevant piece of information first, he'll be prejudged and thrown out the system just because he lives in the wrong place. So it does depend on your circumstances, but our argument is, why waste space on where you live and some of the bits and pieces when that's not what's going to decide whether you get selected for the role? We have to assume you're applying for a job because you want to do it, and you don't want anybody else interfering with that if we can help it. So give them the bare minimum. They need your name, they need to know how to get hold of you if they're compelled to do so, and then you need to cut to the chase. And executive summary, as we've called it, Matt's CV, or professional summary if you prefer, is the what is he, so he's described that, his core value proposition, which actually overtly stated, as you can see, handful of things that he's good at, and we'll have to assume for the time being they're all linked to the hot skills in the marketplace, because we obviously don't know what he's applying for. And it's not real life in the sense that Matt's actually not looking for a job right now. So I hope he's not. So then we go on to the, again, call it slightly different words, but key skills or areas of expertise, or in this case just expertise box. List of bullet points, things that Matt's good at. Things that he'd like to be picked up for if somebody was searching LinkedIn or any of the big job boards, or even possibly Google and seeing what comes out. So they're relevant to him, they're things he change, they evolve over time, but they're things that matter to him and are relevant to his marketplace. And then that current role box. So it's fictitious in Matt's case because, of course, he's not a freelance contractor, but it's just describing pretty much the example that we saw earlier on the slide. And then he's introducing the bit you can just see at the bottom of the screen, a portfolio of projects or assignments that go to prove the stuff that he's just talked about. Now, the important thing about this particular screenshot is it's not too far adrift of what most recruiters would see on their screen if they were using some kind of aggregating software that pulls all applications from all sources into one place, and they literally just sit down in the morning or an afternoon or whatever slot of time they've allocated to go through the applicants and make a quick decision. And if your GoToWebinar toolbars to the right-hand side of this, as mine is, then the other thing that's common is that they'd have a panel with their aggregation software, which is just a means of pulling all the, you know most opportunities are broadcast all over the place. There are bits of software that bring that all together and present the recruiter or HR person with all applicants. Yes, there'd be a flag in terms of where they'd come from, but it would present their information not dissimilar to this. And this is pretty much what the most recruiters would look at and most would make a decision on. So they're not going to scroll much further down. They're not going to take a big read through it unless they pick up on something that's of interest to them. And if they don't like what they see in the opening statement, and sort of in the first third to 50% of page one, if that doesn't convince them, there's a horrible danger they'll scroll across or take their mouse off to the right hand side and they'll hit, and often is a red, an amber and a green button. Red is thank you and good night, amber is a maybe I'll come back to, and green is probably will do something with them. And it is that's how some of these things are set up. It's that quick and that brutal. Now, if you're lucky, they spot something that they're interested in, it might be a straight green, but they're only going to do that if they like what they see. Or if you've puzzled them in some way, but in a positive way, you may just get off the ice, as it were, because they do like something and they come back to you later. The trouble is, you'll never find out any of this. All you'll know is whether actually it's going to happen or not. And then if you ask why it didn't happen, you'll probably be given a whole load of feedback which sounds plausible. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. But is it the real truth? Why did they not select you for interview is what you'd really like to know is the truth to that, but it's one of the hardest things to extract. But as I say, the acid test is if you're not getting interviews, somebody didn't like something. If you're not getting interviews lots of times, lots of somebody's didn't like something on the CV. So then that's a sign that you have to do something and do it quickly. So that's an example of what the CV looked like so far. Now I'll just minimise the document a little bit more so you see the whole of page 1, because that's what we're going to talk about next. So I hope, because I can only see a miniature version of what you can see, but what you should see there is the whole of page 1 on your screen. So we've talked about the first 3 sections, the summary, the expertise, the current role. And the current role introduces the 4th section, which occupies the balance of page 1, which are, in this particular case, 3 case studies describing situations in which Matt has done stuff which we're assuming is well targeted and relevant for his target audience and the kind of opportunities he'd like to seek. So assuming that's the case, how on earth do we put those things together is what we're going to talk about next. Importantly, just to recap, these are not in chronological order. We'll come on to how you deal with the chronological order things, because people do like to know what you've been up to, of course. We'll come on to that later. But for now, what I'm trying to get across is this message that this is the format that gives people, certain people, a lot of flexibility to control what information they present to their target audience. Your decision would have to be, is this the right format for me to go to market with? And in a lot of cases it is, but not all cases. Some people would find this difficult to understand, or they'd want to revert to a more traditional format because maybe they've not been a contractor for very long, for all the reasons I described earlier. So it is something you have to think about, but that's the format. It's build a business case, get the introduction right, and then say, here's the proof to back up what I've just said by way of case studies. So what we're going to do now is look at how we build those case studies in a conformal fashion anyway. So one of the first things to address is, and I have mentioned this before, make sure they're relevant. Relevant is not, and I've said most impressive, but the danger, they do not follow the sort of, these are the ones I enjoyed the most, so I'm going to talk about these, which most people tend to do. So when we see a CV, the ones that have taken the time to put achievements and focus on deliverables, the next mistake is that then most people tend to go with their favourites. Now, their favourites aren't always the ones that the target audience would find most compelling, unfortunately. It's not always true, but sometimes. So give some consideration to the relevance of what you've done, as well as the weight of what you've done. And in terms of the number, as I hinted at earlier, 8 is a bit of a magic number. 6 to 8 is fine. Anything less than 6 is a bit of a cop-out. Anything more than 8 becomes a bit of a burden to all people involved in the process and becomes and normally duplicates stuff. So 6, 7, 8 is about where you need to be in terms of number of different case studies. Importantly, these are individual projects, not periods of time that you've worked with a particular organisation. So I've escaped from the chronological order in one sense because we're not focusing on the what are you doing most recently, what are you doing right now, and then working backwards. The next bit to escape from is not to get confused, these case studies, with whole chunks of employment that you've had. So if you work for for client ABC PLC and you've been there for 12 months, maybe had a renewal or an extension amongst that time, you may actually have performed, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 different projects. Okay, pull out one of those, maybe 2 of those, and build those up into case studies. But don't try and condense all of that 12 months into one concise statement, because it just looks a hideous mess and it won't work and it'll confuse the hell out of everybody. So pick out specific projects, and it doesn't matter if you have more than one specific project for one period of employment. That's not the issue. It's the relevance of the projects that you've picked that's absolutely key to your target audience. We use a really useful acronym to try and compartmentalize and build up these case studies. It's not revolutionary, it's used by lots of other people. It's STAR, Situation, Task, Action, Results. It's a great way of being able to deconstruct complicated things and then repackage them into a fairly succinct amount of text. And it's also, interestingly, a great way of being able to deal with competency-based questions if you get asked those at interview. If you get used to working in this way, it's going to be very helpful. I'm going to show you an example. Again, this is off, this is actually Matt's CV, a real-life experience that Matt had earlier in his career. So you might have noticed the eagle eyes amongst you is that in that project portfolio area on Matt's real CV, we had a little heading and then some text, and then that was replicated as far as you could see 3 times at the bottom of page 1 of his CV. So the little heading is really just to describe it's who on earth the client was. In this case, it's Enterprise Rent-A-Car, so that's the ERAC bit. It was a business transformation project, and the role that Matt had was an interim operations manager for which he performed for 6 months. Now, the other bit of information that would be useful in this line, if it were relevant, would be the number of extensions or renewals within this assignment, if that were relevant. But if it wasn't appropriate to mention it here, because it was just one of the many things going on in that particular client, there's another area I'll come on to later, where that renewal or extension statistic is really important, and you can get across the message. A lot of people forget to put that on their CV, and it's one of the best indicators as to whether you've done a good job, irrespective of the truth. To your target audience, any renewals at all will seem like a good thing and add value. So get it on the CV. I'll show you how later. So here's a project, business transformation project. Matt was involved. 6 months, quite a long period of time, quite complicated, I guess. But he's been able to summarise it into, and again, on the CV it looks a little bit better and tidier, but you wouldn't be able to read the detail. So blown up slightly, but you can read it for yourself. And just to give you some kind of steer, the first sentence is the situation. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car acquired an unprofitable competitor in the south of England that required transformation. That was the situation. It's the headline, if you like, the background, the scene setter. Anybody can understand that. You don't need to know the detail. It just states what it is. It's easy to grasp hold of. The task is the responsibility lying on the individual shoulders. So in this case, it's Matt's shoulders. He was appointed interim operations manager to rebrand the business and blah-de-blah-de-blah. So that was the task. So it's a little bit deeper. So we've said what it is. We've said how Matt fits into this and what was expected of him. Pretty much the rest of the paragraph, until the last sentence, in fact, are the actions that Matt took to achieve or progress that task given to him. So the weight on his shoulders was dealt with by him doing a variety of things. I won't read them all, but it included exiting staff, recruiting new people, blah, 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 blah. And then the final sentence is the result. And this particular case quite powerful, which is why he's mentioned it. So he succeeded in rebranding the business, and the most important thing is he turned a such and such loss into a such and such profit within 6 months. Now, again, for the purposes of this evening, it doesn't matter what those numbers are. What matters is that they're there and that they would be explained to his target audience. So in a very brief amount of space, he's distilled a fairly complex, probably quite painful process succinctly. And it allows anybody just to feel comfortable that Matt, in this case Matt, of course, has got a capability that he's previously explained he had on the CV. So he's built his business case and he's strengthened it by saying, okay, it's easy to say these things possibly, here's the proof. Okay, so unless you were an out-and-out liar and had not done any of these things, he's actually given his target audience some real-life example to demonstrate what he's just said or intimated he's got on his CV earlier on. So it's really important, and if these things are well done, they make a huge difference. So if you now just think about your own circumstances, and you could pick 8 examples of things that you've done, most contractors with any depth of experience have got way more than 8 things, so the difficulty is picking the right 8. The other benefit of taking this approach is that actually it doesn't matter whether you've got 50 of these things. You could write 50 if you wanted to, and then you've got a brilliant portfolio to be able to pick from and load your CV and position it depending on who your audience was. Now for some people that differs almost by the day. For other people it changes in months or even years, but you've always got this stock of stuff that if it's written well doesn't age either. You'll notice there's no time reference here other than the period of time it took Matt to do the project. It doesn't say 1999, doesn't say 2010. There's no implicit reference to technology, which often and obviously dates. So, I mean, for example, if this was more IT biased and he'd launched Windows 95 to the world, that would automatically date things now, not look too clever. So, if you're clever about these things and strip away references to things that do age or give the game away, you can actually build up a really strong portfolio of things that you've done and go to market with them and position them and load them and order them the way you like to control things to present the best case for your target audience. So this is the way you can build a far more effective CV to suit particular circumstances. Now, a brief break. Well, it's not really a break because I'm still rabbiting on, but in terms of, we'll come back to the CV very briefly. One of the things a lot of people tend to ask us at the end of the session is what on earth we do and what do we have to offer. So very briefly, before we get into the rest of the CV and indeed LinkedIn and how you should handle the LinkedIn profile, it won't surprise you now that if you didn't guess beforehand, we write CVs that we believe and can prove significantly increase the chances of getting interviews. Partly through adopting the methodologies that I've talked about and I'm going to continue talking about a little while after this. If you're interested in such a service, and as I say, you've got 2 decisions. If you know your document's not performing, A, you've got to do something, otherwise what's the point? But you could go off and do something yourself, or you could use our services, or indeed services of others as well. We'd rather use our services, but there are other people out there. If you go with that, what tends to happen is you get matched up with somebody who knows your marketplace. So that enables them and you to work together to build up what is your value proposition and how can you leverage that in the marketplace right now. A lot of people don't know that, and that's not unusual. Contractors tend to be better than most because they're more business orientated, but quite a few of our clients who are contractors don't really understand what they've got to offer the world. What's that bit that's really valuable, or they undervalue what they're doing possibly and undersell themselves. So we can help define that and optimize what you've got to offer the world. And these case studies that I've been talking about, most people find them hard to write, truth be told. It's really interesting. It's one of those human quirks. So we've got ways and means in the nicest possible way of extracting them from you and then writing them up. So we can do all the hard work if you want us to. Obviously, we can't invent stuff. You have to give us a source material. But once we've got an idea of what you're about and we've had a discussion with you, which is how we operate, we can normally pick up on the clues and then dig deeper and deeper and deeper and extract from you all the stuff that we need, all the raw data to get to the material that we need. And then we can help identify which ones work and which ones don't, write the CV, the business case from scratch, and the bottom line is that it enables you to get to market more effectively. And so, as you saw maybe at the bottom of that earlier slide as well, if that's of interest, one of the things we do with these webinars for Talent Spas, we actually pull together some pretty impressive discounts on our services, which are time limited, and they're the best you'll ever get kind of offers. Genuinely, you won't get a better price at any other time of the year through any other means. So right at the end of this session, I'll give you some details about that, and you can stash that away for future reference. So far we've talked about building up a CV, a business case, that's largely evidence-based, and I said, well, and I made the point about you do have to talk about the chronological order of things, of course, and so there is a way of dealing with that, and it's relatively simple. I'll show you again how this all works in a short while on Material CV, but the important thing to remember about the CV, it is evidence-based, so we're not spending a lot of time talking about the chronological order. So our approach would be with this style of CV, this case study-led CV, yes, you'd have the dates, the name of the client that you'd worked with, and your job title. You'd mention whether it was contract or permanent, almost in brackets afterwards, because for some people they have had a mix, and you need to reflect that and identify that, but all on one line only, i.e. one line for every single contract. So for a lot of people that's quite a lot of lines, but remember what we're not doing here is we're not trying to explain or get any mileage out of the detail of any of the things that you've done in chronological order. All of that wonderful building the business case stuff's been done earlier, partly through the professional summary, partly through the key skills, mostly through the case studies. And then for a matter of record, we're just giving people one line to say, from this date to that date, I was at this particular client doing this particular job. It was, for most of you, it'll probably be contract, but contract or permanent, and that would all be on one line, just to provide the record so people could see it. And the advantage of doing that, again, some are more subtle than others. It saves a whole heap of space, so you're focusing your document on what you want people to read rather than being constrained to stuff that you might not want to go to market with. So it particularly suits people who've either got gaps in their career, who've been doing junior roles most recently and they want to escape from that. They're wearing more than one hat functionally and want to position themselves as being one of those hats, not all of them, or giving the impression that they're a jack of all trades, master of none. If you've taken time out for whatever reason to give those gaps, and we've dealt with pretty much every reason under the sun at some stage in our lives, then you can't hide that, and we're not looking to hide that necessarily, but you can avoid the focus on it that might otherwise be the case. So for a lot of people, they've had to take time out because sometimes it's personal circumstances, very sensitive in some cases. Sometimes it's a conscious decision because that's what contracting allows you to do. That's another indicator, actually. If for recruiters who don't understand the market, if they keep querying you on why you've not had a continuous amount of employment and you've got gaps of a month, 2 months, 3 months, even a year sometimes, whatever. If that's your choice, that's how you operate. If you get people querying that, then that's probably a sign they don't really get the contract market. But you don't really want to be focusing on the nitty-gritty, so it's a great way of avoiding having to focus on that becoming the core of your document. So for those kind of people, anybody in those kind of situations, it's a really great way of being able to repackage what you'd like people to see in an honest and open fashion. And so even for people with, it depends on the length of your contracts actually, but even for fairly modest contract careers, sometimes you're looking at probably a third, maybe half a page when you put a line for everything. So you imagine if you had to try and explain all of those roles, you'd land up with a 6-7 page document, which you may have right now for all I know, or you've had to edit it severely. So this gives you the opportunity to focus on what's important, but provide the chronological order for those that crave it and indeed probably expect to see on CV. I mentioned this earlier, and this is another area where you can deal with this issue. In this line, if you're saying your contract, you'll have given the dates, so people will be able to work out how long you were there. You could also just put a little note. We tend to put it last thing in brackets afterwards. 3 extensions, 1 renewal or 1 extension, but whatever terminology you're comfortable with, you put that information on this line, and it just gives people a really nice way of being able to see what you've been up to and where. So that's the earlier career bit. And then last couple of bits and pieces to talk about before we move on to LinkedIn, although this is indeed linked to LinkedIn, is we tend to have an area on the CV called recommendations. And we used to call it testimonial evidence. Not many people tend to use their CV to do this, but it does add a lot of value, again, particularly for contractors. You'll be familiar, or most people are familiar, if you've got a LinkedIn profile, you can get recommendations through LinkedIn, and if they're meaningful ones, more of which in a minute, they can be ported across onto the CV. We wouldn't suggest too many. Typically 2 or 3 would suffice, depending on the length and who they're from. But it's a really good way of just building a little bit more confidence and presenting yourself as being more credible than people might otherwise have assumed by putting the right kind of recommendations on your CV, almost verbatim from LinkedIn or indeed other sources. It could be letters, emails, comments you've had from people in the past that's not on LinkedIn but you've got access to, and where people are comfortable to have their name associated with it. Key thing is, though, have to be relevant and appropriate. So if it's from, the ideal ones are from a boss or a client, an employer, somebody who's brought your services into a business to achieve an aim, and they can comment and reflect on that, hopefully positively, of course, not a peer group, a colleague, a friend, who you meet regularly socially, and you've just decided that it would be a good idea to co-recommend each other via LinkedIn. Most people see through that these days. You probably see through it if you see it yourselves. You tend to know when a recommendation is heartfelt and genuine, or sort of backslapping, mutual kind of thing, which isn't wholly effective. You don't want to replicate the ineffective stuff on your CV. So they can be really important, and we have a section on the CV for that very purpose. Now, before I go into LinkedIn in any detail, let me show you Mac CV again. So I'm waiting for your screen to refresh. So we talked about page 1, which half of it sort of building the initial business case, half of it down the bottom, second half is about case studies and proving the detail of the business cases. If I just scroll down a little bit, try and get page 2 and a little bit of page 3 positioned on the screen as it refreshes. What you should see now, top of the screen, is page 2 of Matt's CV. So you'll notice continuation of the case studies. So in this case, we've had 3 on page 1, we've got 4 on page 2, so we're within the sort of the zone of appropriateness, and you can now start to see maybe why 8 or thereabouts is the magic number for case studies. Because if you go much more, you start to take the document to potentially more than 3 pages. In Matt's case, we've kept it at 7, and we've got a 2 and a bit page CV, which you'll see in a minute in more detail. So 4 case studies at the top of page 2. Then the career chronology bit. So if I just magnify that a bit, we talked about that quite a bit. Again, your screen hopefully will, yeah, there we go. So most people should be able to see that now. So two-thirds of the way down page 2, career chronology. You can just see a little bit of the format. It's very simple. It's just literally saying, here are the dates, this is the client, this was the role, and it was contract interim or permanent. The only thing Matt's not put here, which, as I said, I would suggest is a good idea if you've got the evidence and the content, is in that area where there's brackets contract, put contract, comma, X renewals or X extensions, close brackets. It's a really valuable piece of information if you've got it. You can see, if I just scroll down a little bit further, so we're now looking, or shortly you'll be looking when the screen refreshes, at bottom of page 2, top of page 3. I haven't really talked about these much, and I'm not going to right now, but education, qualifications, professional development, all those kind of things normally get bunched into one box, as you can see on Matt's CV. General rule of thumb, go with highest level of education. Don't go with the detail of what you're up to at secondary school, grammar school, or whatever other kind of school you went to. If you've got more than 10 years experience, or even less, to be honest, it's not going to make any difference. So highest level of education only. Anything you've got professionally, yes, so Prince 2, ISEC testing, Any financial things like ACCA, any qualifications like that, then yes, of course, have those. And any serious development or training would go in there. Languages, security clearance, bits and pieces either go in there or the personal details section. Again, doesn't really matter which. Personal details, some people don't like to put their address on the CV, that's a personal decision, but if you do, this is the best place for it. It allows you to escape that prejudging I was talking about earlier. So you're giving your details, but you're not leading with your details. You know, that is not the most important thing about whether somebody is going to invite you to interview. Yes, they might want to know where you live, but it's not the thing you should lead with. If there is anything pertaining to location, it's worth mentioning here. So if you're flexible on location, you're actively looking to relocate, you've actually sold your house but not physically moved, anything like that's worth putting in that personal details section just to give some kind of context to what you'd accept, which may explain why you've applied for the role if anybody got here and suddenly thought, well, hang on a minute, the opportunity's in such and such a place and you're currently living in a place far from there. So that is literally personal in that sense and sorted case by case basis. And then finally recommendations. So top of page 3, which is just about halfway on your screen. In this case, a couple of examples that Matt's pulled out. This just typically would be how it looked. There's no rule of thumb on how long the boxes should be, how long the recommendation should be. It's just pick the ones that seem to make the most sense and most relevance to your target audience. But probably 3 or 4 is tops in terms of number. Otherwise, people just aren't bothered reading them. So here you go. That's the CV. We go back to LinkedIn because that's increasingly important as a tool to combine with marketing yourself. And in fact, in some cases, it's getting essential. So the first thing I'd say is if you're not actually on LinkedIn and you are a professional contractor or interim manager, then I'd be really interested to know why. I have met and talked with quite a few people recently who still aren't on LinkedIn, and their reasons are valid in some cases, or I can understand them, I should say, in that they privacy issues, or they misunderstand what LinkedIn's about and see it as being a sort of Facebook kind of thing, and I suppose in some regards there are elements of that. It's more about how you be visible. So if you've got your own website, there's no way in a million years that you're going to be able to outpoint LinkedIn on visibility unless you spend a truckload of money, which if you're listening to this thing at this time of night, you probably don't have, with all due respect. So it's really important to be on LinkedIn, but be on it well. So if you've got a bad CV and you're just porting it across to LinkedIn, you're just replicating a problem. And so this stat at the bottom of the screen is really important, and it's only going in one way, which is that there's one earlier than this actually, which is really important as well, which is that unsurprisingly people might think, most recruiters, most hirers can only make a judgment based on what you're about from the document you send them. Now, increasingly, how they get access to you and your skills is LinkedIn first rather than CV. Because if they've done a search, if you're on LinkedIn, they've done a search and they're looking for folk, chances are now, and you may have experience of this yourselves, that you're getting noticed on LinkedIn before there's an opportunity to apply for. And if you're not, it's either because genuinely there's not much out there that's fitting your criteria, or you're not in there in such a way as you're getting noticed for people to approach you, which means you might automatically be on the back foot because you're waiting for the application to become official, so to speak. And a lot of stuff's now going not so much under the radar because it's on LinkedIn, it's not under the radar, but there's a lot of people getting hired through LinkedIn without anything else happening. So the message is, firstly, most people can only make a judgment based on either the CV content you send them or the LinkedIn profile that you have, which sounds self-evident. What that means is that you need to make sure that content is well structured and compelling. And then of that vast majority of people who can only make a judgment based on what they see via CV or LinkedIn, the vast majority, again, this 85%, actually will check you out before taking further action. And by check out could mean a whole manner of things, but bottom line is if they see anything they don't like, or is a disconnect between any other source of information they have on you, an old CV, a current CV, and your profile, and you'd be surprised how many people have got completely different messages out there on those two documents or vehicles. And you need to get that sorted, because it just encourages people to think the worst of you rather than to reaffirm your suitableness and suitability, I should say. So, really important to be on LinkedIn if you're looking to promote your wares. The things that people tend to get wrong, I don't know how aware you'll be of the structure of the profile, but just underneath your name on your LinkedIn profile, there's what's called the professional headline. Now, some people stuff that with their most recent role. Some people put, in words to the effect, desperately looking for my next contract, or out of contract, or redundant, or looking for next opportunity. Those really aren't the right things to be saying. LinkedIn's a great vehicle to present a passive view to your audience, i.e., in an ideal world, and it's not that hard to create, or at least to create it, in an ideal world, the action would then follow that up, would be to have a profile that encourages people and gets you noticed, and for people to think, ideally, I hope this individual is available. I hope they're going to like what I have to say to them, because I've got a really good opportunity. And I just hope they're near to the end of their contract, or looking for the next opportunity, or flexible in their contract. That's the ideal situation. What you don't want to be doing is making yourself look actually quite desperate, because that's completely counterproductive. It really doesn't help. So that professional headline needs to be a reflection of your CV, if your CV is right, i.e., what are you, what's your value proposition. Now, there are a limited amount of characters in this particular part of LinkedIn, so you can't go overboard, but you can certainly make it a whole heap better than it probably currently is. And so that's something we take care of as well when we're writing our clients' LinkedIn profiles. The summary areas, that's the bit underneath the heading. So you've got your name, the professional headline, location, sector that you're in, and then you have a big blank area of text which people sometimes stuff their whole CV into. Now again, the summary needs to be building a business case. It needs to be, what am I? What am I offering the world? What are the things I'm good at? What are my key skills? So, surprise, surprise, it's not too dissimilar to a well-written CV. You don't want to list everything you've done under the sun with all the details, despite the fact that LinkedIn encourages you to enter as much as you possibly can. And in fact, LinkedIn's internal scoring systems will give you a better rating the more information you throw at it. Actually, that doesn't help, because having a great profile as judged by LinkedIn can be materially affected and made even better simply by adding a photograph. A photograph won't make the blindest bit of difference to whether you get, actually that's true, but having technically having a photograph, or an image I should say, on your profile, whilst it will, because you could literally load an image of a monkey and your profile would be scored higher as far as LinkedIn's concerned than it would if it was a proper professional shot of you as an individual. So that's my point. LinkedIn scores you because you fill it with content, but if that content's not reflective of what you've got to offer the world, actually that's not help. So it's far more important to have good content that's searchable and will get you identified than it is to tick all the boxes that LinkedIn will encourage you to tick, hence the photograph analogy. So if you've seen a little circular object with how strong is your profile and how you can improve your profile, you'll notice that it's sort of medium, advanced, expert level, or star. They're sort of levels. And simply by adding a photograph can knock you up. But as I said, if you stick a photograph of a strange animal instead of your face, it will still increase your profile strength, which is a bit strange. So what you don't want to do is fill it with everything you've got to offer as far as your positions and contracts are concerned. You just want a summary. You want a taster, and you want to encourage people to engage with you in some way or other. That's the ideal. And the other bit about LinkedIn, which most people don't use, is that if we've taken the time, or if you've taken the time to build a case study approach to your CV, strong business case study evidence to support it, those on LinkedIn work really well, but most people don't do it, and most people don't use the facility that's ideally targeted towards providing that evidence, which is a section called projects. And if you've not looked at that, take a look at it on LinkedIn. It's normally down the right-hand side of your profile when you're in edit mode. There's a button you click on called projects, and then you can stuff it full of things that you've done. But just make sure you pick relevant examples and that you write good content to make a compelling story about what you've got to offer the world. So that's pretty much it on the CV and LinkedIn profile. A couple of things. I promise I'll come back to the questions very shortly, but I also promise that for those that might be interested, if you've got to the point where you're thinking, I know my CV's not right, I need to improve the way I market myself and get out there and pitch myself to companies or recruiters or a combination of the two. If you've taken the decision to do something, well, that's good. As I say, you've got two decisions: do something yourself or get some help. If you do look at the help option, one of the things that we can offer you is a substantial discount over our normal prices. So just to give you some indicator, anybody with more than 7 years experience, if they wanted a CV from us, it's $299 plus VAT. If they wanted a LinkedIn profile from us at the same time, 50 quid plus VAT. And if you wanted a cover letter, 30 quid plus VAT. Cover letters are a bit of a strange thing, more of which at another time perhaps. But so in effect, 299 plus 50 is 349 plus 30 is 379 plus VAT. Fair investment. But until Monday, close of play Monday next week, so a week today, we can give you all of that for 275 plus VAT. But the orders do have to be in our system by that date, close of play Monday 16th. Now, you can order, if you were interested, you can order and take advantage of the system after Christmas, so you don't have to rush and try and get it done before Christmas. You have to take advantage of the offer before Christmas. That's why we offer such a good deal. It's in our interest to do that. But you can take advantage of the service whenever you like, within reason. And we've had another world record. Somebody's waited 12 months. Quite why, I don't know, but they have. But if you wanted to park until January, February, or March, that's entirely up to you. There won't be a better deal than that. There may be other deals of the same nature, in fairness, but there won't be a better deal than this in that time period. So you can be safe in the sense that you'll get as good a deal as you're going to get, but you don't have to take advantage of the service and rush it before you're ready. In terms of the format of the CV, so I've described the case study format CV. If you were going ahead with this, that price will buy you either format, and it's a discussion we have with our clients in a lot more detail come the time, and we've sought out which format was best for your circumstances. If you decided that you wanted both formats, it's not 275 times 2 or anything like that. So we discuss that again with you on a one-to-one basis, but it's a fairly modest charge if you want to do both styles. I said most people get away with one style. The trick is just making sure we go with the right one. If you fancy doing it yourself, though, and having a go, we do a great pack, which you can order on the website as well, for just 18 quid, or 15 quid plus VAT. And it's some templates, a workbook, and quite valuably an interview ebook, which has lots of hints and tips about how to handle interviews and discussions of such a nature. And that's really just a bit of a attempt for people to maybe stick a toe in the water, give it a go. If you don't like working through the process, you can always come back to us and we'll help you from that point onwards. But if I say you want to put a toe in the water, we can help in that regard. And on this link, which I shall type into the chat room facility as well as the question area shortly, because you can't click on it by your screen. You just visit this link and or write it down and go to it later. Then both deals are on the same landing page you'll get to as soon as you hit the return button, and you can take advantage of either offer. If you have any questions right now, I'll answer them very shortly. And if you want to speak with us, then by all means visit our website. The number's on there. Give us a call and we'll talk through your specific circumstances in more detail. And for those that have asked questions, I will now come on to those and deal with them in turn. And if you've got any other questions, you've probably got about 5 to 10 minutes to ask them before I need to wrap this thing up. But for those that need to disappear, then by all means, good night to you. Thank you for your time and attention. It's been quite a long session, but I hope you got from it something, and it allows you to take the right kind of course. But as I say, by all means, come back to us on a one-to-one basis if you need any help. So I'll come on to the questions now, but as I say, for those that need to disappear, thank you very much, and good night to you, and happy Christmas as well. For those that want to hang on and listen to the answers, again, more than welcome to, and that'll probably take me just a couple of minutes. There don't seem to be too many. And I'll also just put in that website link into the question thing, so I'm not very good at multitasking, so there's that website link as well on the screen in the question area if anybody needs it. Thank you for your comments, it's really nice. Okay, I'm going to deal with the questions now. I'll just do them all in order. So, Himadri, if you're still on, you ask, can anyone still get contract work without having a LinkedIn profile? Why is it must, and what are the alternative approaches? Okay, really good question. If you're still on, Himadri, I know you answered that right up early in the session. I'm sure there are people still doing work without LinkedIn profiles. My view on this is just it's probably harder. A lot of people get contracts word of mouth, and loads of people come to us over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly, who are saying things like, I've never had to use a CV, or I've very rarely had to use a CV, but now it's tougher. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. Climate, clients are risk averse in a lot of cases, or they want to dot the I's and cross the T's. A whole host of reasons as to why it's tougher. But I think the reason why LinkedIn is now so important is because recruiters and employers are using it. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is that it's not just about having a LinkedIn profile and an account, and either a basic or the premium membership you can have as an individual. Not only are there the corporate accounts, of course, but there are also lurking behind all of that recruiter solutions. They're actually called LinkedIn Recruitment Solutions. If you Google that, you can go and have a look at them. But they are quite expensive tools which LinkedIn sell to their corporate clients and recruiters to actively encourage them to use LinkedIn. And there's a lot of rumours that LinkedIn are going to launch a big recruitment product at some stage and take it even further. But so many recruiters now are getting quite lazy in some regards and using LinkedIn to find people. And the danger with that is that if they do find somebody, of course they'll never think different, and they'll just use it again the next time. And so if you're on there, at least you stand a chance. If you're not on there, increasingly you'll find it harder, I think, simply because people are using it as the start point. For employers who want to save a few quid, it's a great way of just spending maybe a couple of hours in the morning seeing what they can generate and keeping their fingers crossed. If it brings up a candidate, great, they'll go with it. For recruiters, it's quite hard to get names of good people these days. LinkedIn's a great way for people to get names. So recruiters tend to use it as a sourcing tool. And again, if they find the right people, then they don't have to do anything else. They don't have to spend money with the job boards or in the trade press or on specific websites. It just all points to just be on there, basically, because it's expected now, people. So a bit of a long-winded answer. I hope that helps. Okay, what else have we got here? Some questions from Helena. Thank you for your comment, Helena. What is your take on using a portfolio style CV when also potentially aiming at a permanent role? Yeah, that's a very good question, and part of a cop-out, Helen, on my point, is it depends a little bit on your circumstances. Those portfolio style CVs, it's not that they don't, I keep sort of positioning it, and I have positioned it, of course, as being specifically for contractors. It works really well for contractors for all the reasons I suggested. It doesn't mean to say it wouldn't work in a permanent environment, because ultimately what most people are interested in, whatever the nature of their role that they have to offer, what they're interested in is the evidence to support the ability of the individual to perform that role. So if you structured the document well enough and you had the right case studies and the right opening statements, it's just as likely that you'll secure an interview with a portfolio style CV. And in fact, in some cases, it's maybe even more likely because you're providing what the target audience is expecting to see. My main comment on it would be, and the biggest differentiator would be whether you're going through recruiters all the time or whether you're targeting employers. Employers tend to be really pro it because it gives them what they're looking for. Recruiters tend to be a little bit more reserved because some of the recruiters, to be harsh, they're not the best judge of what makes a good CV. And indeed, when asked, is my CV good, that elicits all sorts of responses which have got nothing to do with the technical nature of the CV and got everything to do whether they can earn a fee from the individuals whose CV it is, and they're different motivators. So need a little bit more information, but I'd say there's no harm in going to market with a portfolio style CV, but particularly if you're targeting employers directly. Just to go a bit further with you, if a particular language is key, then bring it early on, correct? Yes, absolutely. In that professional summary, if language is really important, if you're multilingual, that's a really positive skill, particularly in the UK, because it's not, I hope those that are still on aren't all multilingual, otherwise I've just shot myself in the foot, but the average Brit is not multilingual, and so it stands out in the UK as being a real skill. So in that professional summary, you could, for example, not knowing what you do, you could say a multilingual project manager, or a project manager with multilingual skills, or a project manager with Spanish and French, or something like that. Somewhere in that opening statement you could build it in. So yes, bring it on early, particularly if it's key. And also within the key skills area, remember those bullet points? Either duplicate it, there's no harm in duplicating skills within reason, or specifically mention something about the language element in there as well, so you just make sure you're driving home that advantage. And on LinkedIn, does frequent updating can be tricky regarding contacts? Can you show us some good LinkedIn examples? I mean, it's a good question. It's difficult showing you LinkedIn examples because A, I'm not hooked up to the right thing to be able to show you live, but if you wanted to see, in fact, actually, I don't know how relevant it is. If you search for Matt Craven, bearing in mind that he works for CV and Interview Advisor, so you'll know whether you're onto the right one or not. His profile is deliberately set up to look at, it's a bit different because his profile has got to be based on what he's doing in a commercial environment, but that's a good example of how it's structured. Mine at the moment for marketing is deliberately not good because we want to show people compare and contrast. Mine is a bit like how most people's are. So take a look at Matt's. Matt Craven, that's M-A-T-T-C-R-A-V-E-N, Matt Craven. And that's probably a good example. And Helena, if you needed any more advice on that, just get in contact with us via our website or give us a call or drop us an email. And I'm more than happy to show you some specific examples on a one-to-one basis. And to answer your frequent update can be tricky regarding contacts. Yeah, if you mean by that, again, good point, if you mean by updating your profile, it makes it look like you're hunting for jobs, then yeah, quite a few people are sensitive about that. There is something you can do. It won't solve all the problems, but there is a facility inside LinkedIn called the broadcast facility. And off the top of my head, what you have to do is you have to go in, you have to log in, of course. Then you hover over, if you've got a little picture of you, top right of LinkedIn screen when you're logged in. There's you hover over what would be your little picture. Say top right of the screen, it brings down a menu, one of which is privacy and settings off the top of my head. You select that, you get a screen which shows you a whole bunch of things, and on that screen, somewhere in the middle, there's a turn broadcast activity on/off. And if you click on that, there's a tick box, and if you make sure that's unticked and then save your option, that stops that stream of updates going out to people whenever you change your role or make a profile change. and obviously if people look at your profile, they'll see any changes you're making, but it stops that horrible nagging sort of list of emails. So even if you go and change the spelling of your name, or not so much your name but your job title, it assumes you've got a new job and tells everybody about it. You can get rid of that without affecting your ability to be searched. So that might help you, but I'm afraid, yes, you're right. If you're bothered by that, if you think by changing your profile it will raise the concerns of your employers, current employers, I'm afraid you have to take a call on that. It's a personal decision whether you just do it and accept that that's what people do these days. It's not so untypical, or don't do it and just accept your LinkedIn profile may not be as up to date as you'd like it to be. We say to people, look, most folk these days update their profile, and as long as you're not avert about it, and as long as you switch off some of those broadcast things I mentioned, you can at least control to a degree what people think and see, but ultimately you'll know best whether it's worth updating it or not, and on what basis. I hope that's helped. Right, let's see if there's anything else. Babs, if you're still on, thank you for that. Is it necessary to put your picture in LinkedIn? That's a really good question. No, I mean, the bottom line is no, it's not necessary. And I don't know what the percentages are now. It used to be, if you'd asked me to guess, I would have said it's probably about 25 to 30-something% have photos and the balance don't, and that's probably gone up slightly. But it's not to such a level, I'd say, make sure your picture's on there. So I'd say don't feel obliged to. And I suspect over time that might be one where people regret sticking their photo on there. All these things with privacy and what have you and stuff. So I think for the foreseeable future it will remain one of those things where there's a balance. Some people will just do it by default. Some people will do it because LinkedIn tries to encourage you to stick a photo and makes you feel bad about not putting a photo there. I wouldn't be bothered about it. If you're concerned about it, don't do it. You don't have to do it. Also, Babs, if I have more experience than make my CV overflows to more than 3 pages, is it advisable to all my experience to remove some experience and allow it to be 3 pages? Right, okay, Babs, again, very good question. It's complicated, really. It all depends on what you've got to offer the world and what that experience is. But generally speaking, first thing I'd say is don't worry too much about whether your CV is 3 pages or 4 pages. Worry more about the nature of the content. So our approach is always, what are you trying to do going forwards? What is it you've got in your toolkit, so to speak, to justify that objective? So whatever you're trying to do, have you got the experience to justify doing it? If you have, then we start building the business case as you saw by way of example. Now with the portfolio style case study kind of CV that I showed you this evening, to be honest, it automatically keeps itself to 3 pages, simply because if you go with 8 case studies or 6 to 8 case studies, and you don't have a massive long history of contracts that would take a lot of lines up, you're automatically going to be within 3 pages just because of the structure of the CV. If you are writing a chronological CV, then our general rule of thumb is detail the last 8 to 10 years. And when I say detail, I mean just make sure people know what you've been doing, where you've been doing it, achievements within the role. But don't provide much detail for anything older than 10 years. It will not make the blindest bit of difference as to whether you get interviewed or not. People just aren't interested in it. Yes, you've got to make reference to what you've been doing and where, but you don't need to provide detail for stuff that happened in 1999 or earlier than that, really, with early 2000s and something. So there's never a real specific answer back to your question, but generally, as I say, contract style CV, case study style CV will automatically be 3 pages unless you have something very strange going on. Chronological style CV, we'd limit to probably 3-4 pages at a stretch, simply because you don't want to be talking about lots of your experience in any detail beyond 8 to 10 years ago, because it won't make any difference till you get an interview. People make a decision based on what most recently you've been doing and the skills you've got to offer, which could be proven in other ways. So I That's it for the questions. So it's just gone 9, so we're very late. I thank you again for those that stood on for your time and attention. Really hope we got something out of that this evening. And so I will now bid you good night. And again, any questions that have been unresolved, by all means contact us via the website. If you're interested in taking up the offer, just make sure you resolve that by a week today, probably about this kind of time, or any time in between. And if we never speak again, happy Christmas and a very pleasant 2014. And I'll sign off now, so I'll be on for another 10-15 seconds, just in case. But I'll start signing off and bid you good night. Cheers, everybody.